official. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has named Nicole Shanahan, a lawyer from Oakland, as his vice presidential pick, becoming the first 2024 presidential hopeful to actually announce a running mate.
The Democratic Party is supposed to be the party of compassion. It is supposed to be the party of diplomacy and science. It is supposed to be the party of civil liberties and free speech, and most importantly, the party of the middle class and the American dream. While I know many Democrats still abide by those values, I want to point out, and I've been in touch with many people in the Democratic Party, I do believe they've lost their way in their leadership.
Now, RFK Jr.'s third-party run is causing consternation for both GOP presumptive nominee Donald Trump and President Joe Biden. Trump actually took to Truth Social early this morning, 1:52 a.m. to be exact, to rail against RFK Jr. and take a jab at his number 2 pick, writing, quote, RFK Jr. is the most radical left candidate in the race by far. His running mate, Nicole Shanahan, is even more liberal than him. Expect him and her to be indicted any day now, probably for environmental fraud. He is crooked Joe Biden's political opponent, not mine. I love that he is running.
But, of course, RFK Jr. isn't the only one that Biden and Trump need to worry about. According to multiple reports, Nikki Haley may be out of the race, but voters who supported her are very much in play and up for grabs. A New York Times story highlights how Trump is yet to reconcile with former rival Haley, while Biden's camp is testing messages that could draw in Haley voters. Trump's campaign isn't worried, telling the outlet that a Biden-Trump rematch will pull most Republicans back into the typical GOP fold.
So we've talked about this before. We had some warning that it was going to be this woman, Nicole Shanahan, ex-wife of Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, someone with a considerable war chest of her own to contribute to the campaign efforts, someone who has identified as a Democrat in the past, she explained there, but has differences of opinions like RFK Jr. does with how the Democratic Party behaved during COVID and on some other matters. So here we are. This is the ticket, and it's an interesting one.
It is, because it goes to one of the central questions, I think, about the RFK Jr. candidacy. Does he take more votes from Biden or from Trump, or does he alternatively just bring in people who are disaffected by the existing choices, wouldn't otherwise vote? Now, as you say, Ms. Shanahan is a progressive. You would think maybe that does sort of increase the appeal to Democrats. But of course, one of the things about her having such a vast personal fortune is that she could assist with the effort to actually get their names on the ballot. And that, to a large extent, is the ball game for them.
Yeah, that's going to be a big part of it. Polls have shown when RFK Jr. is included up against Trump and Biden, it detracts from both of them. It detracts from Biden a little bit more. That's what polls are showing us. So I see Trump, smartly leaning into that framing, saying these are radical progressives. Look at what they've said on environmental issues. Look at what they've said on gun rights. Look at all those things. RFK Jr. was he was a Democrat and then some. Sure. Maybe with a little bit of difference on vaccines. But then when that became this huge issue, and frankly, a lot of progressives and Democrats had different opinions about vaccines until that became a tribal dividing line, where if you have any skepticism of vaccines or requiring them, frankly, you have to be on the Republican side, basically, or you have to be you can't be in good standing in the Democratic Party. Right. So it is interesting to see that. Obviously, RFK Jr. has gotten, I think, a warmer reception in conservative media, at least up until now, than he has in liberal or mainstream media. Frankly, they won't even, when they interview him, I can't remember if it was CNN or MSNBC, they wouldn't even play the entire interview. So he has, he's an interesting character. Like you said, I tend to think third-party candidates, including RFK Jr., draw. It's all of what you said. They draw from Republicans and Democrats. They also draw on a reservoir of voters who are dissatisfied and, frankly, would not cast their vote for either of the other two people if that was not an option. We love to accuse them of being spoilers, but it's like, well, I frankly don't buy that a lot of the times.
No, and here I will have to confess that I got something wrong in the early days of RFK Jr.'s bid. I really thought that there was a sort of a surge in polling support for him that would just evaporate over time, that people had seen the name Kennedy, had thought, oh, JFK, and of course the original Robert F. Kennedy, and thought, oh, well, that sounds good, or that sounds interesting, and that over time that support would just go. It hasn't really. I mean, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is not going to be the next president of the United States, but it is now a real candidacy. And let's say he ends up, even with slightly less than his polling level,
sure,
10, 12%. I mean, that matters a lot in an election that we think is going to be decided by 1 or 2 percentage points.
Yeah, even 6, 7, 8% would be the best showing for a third-party candidate since Perot.
Why do you think he's polling so well? Relatively.
I think he has tapped into a dissatisfaction that is felt throughout America. The fact that we have a rematch we have an exact rematch. We did this already. Joe Biden, Donald Trump, two extremely unpopular political figures. Joe Biden is viewed as not the right candidate necessarily by most Democrats. Are concerned that he's too old. They see him on camera. Those concerns are getting worse every day because, frankly, he's getting older every day. There's nothing you can do to assuage that concern because it's in our faces. And of course, Donald Trump has alienated a vast swath of the electorate, including some of his own Republicans. I know, Republicans I'm from Michigan, a quintessential swing state. There are Republicans in my family and friends who don't want Joe Biden to be president, think the economy is terrible under him and his policies are terrible, and would vote for anyone with an R next to the name, but not Donald Trump, because they're sick of him. So people have this frustration that this is really all we have. And frankly, the fact that RFK Jr., compared to them, looks youthful. He's an older man too, but he looks youthful compared to the two of them. And the Kennedy name does something, but it's not just the name. It's helped, I think, get him in the conversation, but he's tapped into a real discernible frustration out there.
I wonder as well, does that frustration expand beyond Biden and Trump, who have all the failings that you mentioned, to a broader skepticism of, the establishment or the orthodoxy or whatever? Because he's clearly playing into that. I don't frankly care for his views on vaccines, but he does, I think, raise legitimate questions about whether certain opinions are excluded from the conversation, whether certain points of view are excluded from the conversation. And I wonder, is that in a way as potent a calling card for him as the clear dissatisfaction with both Trump and Biden? Absolutely.
I mean, he's really talked about and campaigned on, civil liberties. She brought that up. She's saying that, where wasn't the Democratic Party the party of civil liberties? And, we've done a lot of reporting on the show on, whatever you think, you can totally disagree with him. I disagree with him on aspects of his COVID stuff, and frankly, a lot else. I disagree with his gun and environmental policies, very much so. But it has been pretty clear that there was, frankly, a concerted effort on the part of the government to make it harder for social media companies to allow dissenting views on some of these subjects. And that looks, even setting aside the vaccines issue, looks pretty foolish on some of the COVID claims, which, where the experts were saying, oh, it's this, and this, and we find out, well, the experts have changed their mind a bunch of times. And you couldn't discuss it. You couldn't even discuss the lab leak theory on Facebook for a long time, and now that's the Energy Department's leading theory for what happened. I mean, there's legitimate debate about it, and you couldn't have that. So I think he's tapped into a lot of those frustrations. Now, obviously, the system is so rigged against third-party candidates. They've made it, both parties have conspired to make it difficult for you to vote for someone other than the main parties. We have this winner-take-all system in most states. So, like you said, it's going to be hard for him. It's very hard for him to win the election. To even win a state, but he will make a difference. And if either Trump or Biden want to capture some of his voters, they can speak to the concerns of the disaffected, the concerns of the anti-establishment, but they're not doing it, and it's given voice to someone like him.
It has, and absolutely, I think he is going to matter. The question is, who is he going to matter most to, right? And I really don't have a great sense of that, because I can conjure up in my mind the classic Biden voter. I can conjure up in my mind the classic Trump voter. Who is the RFK Jr. voter? I mean, yes, someone who is dissatisfied or uncomfortable with some of the issues we've just been talking about, but is it left-wing Democrats? Is it people in the middle? You know, that whole process is really interesting to me.
I mean, I think it is interesting. I think it's Democrats who were solid Democrats until COVID, and who remember how long their schools were shut down, and all of that. I think it's also some Republicans who are sick to death of Donald Trump, but could never vote for Joe Biden, and are looking for someone else. I think it's some. I mean, frankly, it could be some Republicans as well who are pretty to the right on a lot of this stuff, and think Trump didn't get the job done last time. Trump railed against the administrative state and the deep state and how it's weaponized and how it's hurting him. Didn't do anything about it when he was president.
Right.
So maybe people who agree with Trump on those things, but are looking for, now obviously Joe Biden isn't going to do anything about those things. They think Joe Biden has rigged that whole system against them. So maybe a Kennedy, and then maybe also just some centrist or moderate people who, I mean, the Kennedy name speaks to a kind of moderate politics, and you know, JFK, a moderate figure in many ways, and have favorable memories there, and are listening to him and thinking that he doesn't sound any worse than anyone else. I think he's going to take from all three buckets.
Which is what separates him from, as a third-party candidate, from the fourth and fifth-party candidates, right? You know, Jill Stein or Cornel West have a view that they articulate effectively, but it's not going to pull any disaffected Republicans or any people in the center ground.
And we are still, you know, we're still looking at whether there's been all this conversation about whether RFK Jr. would potentially be the Libertarian Party candidate. I predict that's not going to happen. There was some interest from some Libertarian Party leadership. The rank and file in the Libertarian Party are going to hold against him, obviously, the things I'm holding against him.
Which is that he's not really a Libertarian, right?
Et cetera. So that was always going to be a difficult match. So I don't think that's going to happen, but we will see. There's still some time left until the election, and we will continue to follow the campaign, of course. More Rising right after this.